Hi, my name is Lilia. We need to get more girls involved with the STEM fields in order to be equal participants in the future generation of innovators and leaders. I reached out to inspiring role models who are paving the way for women around the world to hear about what they had to say on closing the gender gap.
I'm Ochoa. I was a NASA astronaut and also the director of Johnson Space Center. And I've recently retired after 30 years at NASA.
So thank you so much for the recording.
Yes.
I think it's so cool that you were an astronaut. It's crazy. I guess we can start with the 3 questions. So the first one was, were there any gender barriers you encountered in your career, and if so, how did you deal with them?
Well, absolutely. I think all girls and women, particularly when I was growing up, saw some of that. Even when I was thinking of going to college, I was interested in going to one of the service academies, but at that time they didn't accept women. They were talking about maybe allowing women, and I wrote off to my member of Congress, but really all he told me was, well, I'm sorry, no women are allowed at the academies. So I went to San Diego State, which was my local university, and then 1 year later is when they decided to admit women to the academies. And at San Diego State, I would say it was kind of a mix. Certainly I had people who encouraged me what I was doing, but I also had professors who, clearly weren't interested. When I was looking around for a major, I talked to a professor in the electrical engineering department, and he was really trying to discourage me from going into that field. But then I talked to a professor in the physics department who was very encouraging and asked me a lot about my background, said he thought I'd do really well, told me about different careers that people could have when they majored in physics, which was really important to me because I didn't know much about that. I didn't know any scientists. And so, getting some of that information was really important. So I think a lot of it was just nobody expected girls or women to go into science or engineering. They never brought it up. They never mentioned it. So I, kind of had to find my way there on my own.
Yeah. So I guess it was a more difficult process for you just because you didn't have all the available resources that maybe a man trying to go into the field had, less people guiding you almost.
Yeah, and I think I would have had more encouragement. For example, at my high school, they gave the math students in the advanced classes a national exam. Math Association of America gave it out. So I got the highest grade at my high school. And I think if I'd been a boy, people would have talked to me about, well, you do well at math. Here's what you might want to study in college. You may want to think about going into engineering or science or something. But nobody really said anything to me after I got the highest grade at my school. I mean, I guess it just didn't occur to them. So hopefully things have changed, at least somewhat since then. But I think that's kind of the differences that you saw at that time.
Yeah. So I guess the next question was, you've had many successes in your career, and I suspect your life. Can you share the one that you're the most proud of?
Well, to me, I spent my career really in human space flight. And so the successes that we had there were really ones that we did as a team, right? So I was on 4 missions, and, the missions were all successful. And so to me, those were obviously some of the biggest highlights of my career. But, it's such a team effort. And when you think about all the people that are involved, not just specifically in the missions I was on, but that help prepare the shuttle, to launch and all of that, it's a team of many thousands of people. So I never really think of it as my successes, but I think of it as something that I got to contribute to. That was a bigger success overall. And 2 of those missions, the first 2, were missions involving atmospheric chemistry and physics. So we were looking at the problems of the ozone hole and ozone depletion and trying to understand more about what was causing that and the differences between what humans were causing and what the natural variation in the radiation from the sun was causing. And then my third and fourth flights were part of assembling the International Space Station. And, I would say overall, I got all kinds of different chances and ways to contribute to the space station program. Even before those missions, I was leading the astronaut office support to the space station program. And this was before it was built. I mean, this was, we were still designing it. Maybe the very first element was starting to be built. But we had just joined up with the Russians a couple of years earlier. So I would meet up periodically along with, of course, other NASA people, with members of the Russian Space Agency and their main contractors. And we were actually negotiating protocols about how are we going to train for the station? How are we going to select crews? What language are we going to talk in training? What language are we going to speak on the International Space Station? So I was really involved in all of that, operations work pretty early on. And then I got to be on the first shuttle mission that docked with the station. It was the second one overall, but the first one to dock with it. And so nobody was living on board yet. It didn't have a habitation module, but we transferred a bunch of supplies, both inside and outside, in preparation for crews that were going to live on board. And then I got to go back 3 years later. Of course, people were living on board by then. And we added the first piece of the truss structure, which is now 350 feet long. And of course, the 4 large solar arrays are attached to the truss structure. But at that time, there was just one solar array on board, attached in a different place. So we started building out the truss. So, and then after I came back from that flight, I went into different kinds of management and leadership roles. And really, a lot of them had quite a bit to do with supporting the space station and making sure that we were completing the assembly process. And then, of course, assigning crews and training them and making sure that we had a lot of really interesting science for them to do on board, which is continuing today. So, overall, the chances that I had to support the space station program are probably what I really look back on with pride, along with, all the thousands of folks that supported it as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. Like, just thinking about all those things you were saying about, like, even just like making like simple, well, I guess not simple, but like compromises with people, like, oh, like you said, like just deciding what language to speak.
Exactly.
That's something like I would have never thought to be like an issue. I can totally see that being like a big type of thing to handle. So I think that's like really cool. You were like part of all of it, and now it's like super established and like this big thing. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I guess the last question, what is your personal message to young women entering the STEM fields?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is we need you. So we definitely need all those bright brains out there and good ideas. And, one thing I always try to talk about when I'm speaking at schools is, I think a lot of people don't have necessarily the right perspective about science. But really, it's about creativity. It's about being part of a team. It's about solving problems. And I think those are things that all appeal to girls as well as boys. So sometimes I think people get sort of a wrong impression in their mind about, scientists or what they do or how they work. But, and some scientists do work more or less alone in a lab. But in my experience, the vast majority actually work with teams. And you're working together to solve problems, to really benefit people here on Earth. So we need girls in STEM fields. And then the second thing I would say is you need to listen to yourself, and you need to find people who will support you. because you probably will run into some people who will not encourage you, may do the exact opposite. But there are always other people, lots of people out there who will support you and encourage you. And there's a lot of different kinds of groups that people can turn to, where there are student chapters, like the Society of Women Engineers or the Society of Physics Students, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, Women in Science. There's just lots of organizations that are really invested in getting women and other underrepresented groups more involved in STEM fields. So I would search those out so that you have sort of that community, whether it's, right locally at your school or even just virtually because you belong to a group and you can, get it that way. And I think that will help to sort of counteract maybe any negative experiences that people have and really get them excited about careers in the STEM fields.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of the people that I've spoken to have really highlighted the fact that there's all these groups out there that, and all these resources, which is really true, especially just from my perspective, there's a lot of things out there. So I think just making use of your resources is really important. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Anyway, it's very nice to meet you and best of luck in the future.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.